The other big story today is the jobs rate. It's actually a pretty good jobs report. This is the first jobs report since the government shutdown, and it did beat expectations. Economists had worried that this shutdown would slow hiring down. Now, January's numbers mean that we have had 100 consecutive months of job gains. That's a record run. Let's take a look at this. The unemployment rate actually went up to 4%. It went up by 0.1%. We're going to discuss that in a minute. I always say there are a lot of reasons why this should not be the number you pay the most attention to. This is the number you should pay the most attention to, or at least some attention to. 304,000 net new jobs. If you take all the jobs that were created minus all the jobs that were lost, you end up with 304,000 added in January. Now, we always tend to see revisions to the last 2 months, and we got those. In November, the jobs report was revised up by 20,000 jobs to 196,000 added, which is a respectable number. December was revised down by 90,000. That's a bigger revision than we typically get. Still, the remaining number was 222,000, which is a pretty good number, but the initial number was 90,000 more than that. So we got an upward revision of 20,000 to November, a downward revision of 90,000 to December. For 2018, we created 223,000 net new jobs per month, which is pretty good. This number for January is yet better than that. The question remains as to whether we'll see revisions to that in the following couple of months. Okay, here's where the rubber hits the road. Wages. This is what matters to people. We have seen a net wage increase of 3.2% year over year. Now, you have to factor inflation into that. Inflation is lower than this amount, so people are seeing a small increase. This is the number we want to sort of see on a consistent basis without huge inflation. All right, and then let's talk about something called the U6 unemployment rate. This is a little broader than the initial unemployment rate we use. It includes everybody who's in the official jobless rate. It also includes those people who have tried to find a job in the last year and who have not looked in the past 4 weeks because they've been discouraged or they don't think they're going to get a job or whatever the reason may be. This also involves part-time workers who qualify as being employed, but they would rather have a full-time job. When you put that all together, we've got a number of 8.1%. There are reasons to look at this number as opposed to the 4% and the reasons to look at the other number as well, but this one is actually up by 0.5 of a point. Now, let's look at where the jobs were created. There are many industries that created jobs, but these are the four biggest. 74,000 jobs were added in construction, 52,000 in healthcare. Healthcare is always a big gainer. Even through the recession, you saw healthcare jobs increasing largely because of our aging population. Transportation added 42,000 jobs, and warehousing added 27,000 jobs. So that's the top line picture of this employment report. I want to dig into this a little more with Diane Swonk, who's the chief economist at Grant Thornton. Diane, good to see you. The question I'm getting on Twitter from people is, where does the shutdown figure into this?
Well, it's really interesting. It's more in the unemployment data, and it's also in the number of people taking part-time jobs instead of having full-time jobs. That actually added to that U6, the stress figure of unemployment, popped it over 8% during the month. Over 500,000 people joined those ranks of people having to take part-time jobs instead of full-time jobs for what we call economic reasons. They had actually wanted full-time jobs. A lot of those were contractors that weren't paid and furloughed workers that weren't paid. And so some of the gains that we saw were actually these people taking part-time jobs to offset what they were losing elsewhere. So there's a little bit of double counting in there. We also saw an increase in the unemployment rate for government workers. That picked up a bit. And for workers that were on temporary unemployment, 175,000 of the 340,000 workers that were furloughed in Washington as a result of the shutdown. That's really interesting, though, that so many workers, the good news is, in a good economy, workers who were living paycheck to paycheck and having such a desperate time were able to get offsetting jobs to be able to supplement their income even when they weren't getting paid. The bad news is that's what they had to do.
Diane, let me ask you about something, because people, Donald Trump was one of those people who, when he wasn't president, criticized these numbers from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. The Department of Labor said they're not true. Now he touts them a lot, and I get other people, when we get strong numbers, who don't like Donald Trump saying, well, the numbers are not believable. There are reasons why one would be critical of the numbers, but the trend is consistent. In other words, if you didn't like them 10 years ago, you have the same reason not to like them now. If you liked them 10 years ago, nothing's changed in the way they gather these numbers. So what sort of stock do you put in these statistics?
Well, they're incredibly important, and they're always trying to improve the way in which they do the data as well. One of the biggest problems we have is because of the attacks on institutions and concerns about people's privacy. I work with these statisticians all the time, and they're trying to protect the other parts of government from getting at some of the data, which is really important as well, because your privacy needs to be protected. But we don't have, it takes much longer to get these surveys right because fewer people want to answer the questions when it's something like a household survey. They actually call you up and ask you specific questions. So it's really important that we're not getting the compliance we once did, and that's in large part because of all this noise we hear externally when they're really just trying to get the right data. Also, on the front page of this report, it says right there, oh, by the way, there's a 500,000 increase in workers looking for part-time instead of full-time for economic reasons, and we think this is because of the furloughed workers and because of the contractors. Says it right on the front page of the document. So if you actually read these at all, to the fourth paragraph of the front page, you get this information.
I do often recommend, actually, that people go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's got a great data set. You can actually learn a lot about
amazing.
the economy that doesn't come out in this stuff. Is there any data that's missing because of the shutdown?
Well, you know, what's the most, not in this particular one, there is on the more detailed reports. They couldn't do all of that. The BLS, Bureau of Labor Statistics, which does this report, was actually funded, but there's more detailed reports that didn't get done in the CPS, they call it. It's a survey there. But what's really important in this number as well, I think, is that we forgot, we're in the middle of polar vortex. I just got out of it for the last 2 days here in Chicago. It was colder than Antarctica. Everything was shut down. That's not going to show up in any employment reports because it wasn't the survey week. The week of the survey actually was an unusually warm week, and that's why you have such strong construction data in this number, because actually the unseasonally adjusted data fell. So those are important things to understand about what happened, as well as there was a lot of mixed messages and a lot of noise in this particular report. At the end of the day, take 100,000 off, take 150,000 off. It's still a good report.
Let me ask about revisions. That's another thing people ask about. The report revised December's very big gains of 312,000 jobs down to, as you said, 222,000, which is good. What do we need to know about revisions?
Well, revisions come in, again, as more data comes in, they try to get us, there's this balance between getting the speed and the quality of the data. What they can get us fast is the first cut, and then they go back and they get more information from employers on the establishment survey that fills in the gaps, and that's really important to do over time. And so we do see these revisions. These were benchmark revisions. We do see these revisions that people say, wait a minute, can we even read this data? Don't put too much weight into month-to-month numbers, but the underlying trend, 100 months, wow.
You and I have talked about the idea that we may be coming into a slowdown in 2019, 2020. Some of that would just be not expected, but, you know, we've been in an expansion for a long time. These are really, really good numbers. How does that work when we start looking at a slowdown? Do they suddenly slow down, or are we at a good number? I mean, to be seeing two plus 100,000 net new jobs a month is pretty good.
It is extremely good, and that it gives us a lot of confidence that the recession isn't tomorrow. It doesn't give us any confidence of whether or not the recession is in 8 months or 12 months or 24 months. And so that's what the hard part is, that we should be seeing some kind of slowdown coming in through the numbers. It means that employers are still confident enough to hire. And I made the point that, you know, luckily the economy is strong enough and labor markets are tight enough. In a different economy, those workers who were furloughed wouldn't have had the opportunity to pick up some extra money and at least try to cover some of their bills with part-time work. So that's really good. So right now the numbers are not signaling, you know, red that this is a recession, nor are they signaling yellow yet. We have other numbers that we're worried about, but they've yet to fully work their way through the data. We haven't seen a lot of business investment. That's a sign of hesitation by businesses that they're worried about the future. We've seen home sales and big ticket purchases like vehicle sales peak in 2017, and that's a long time to have a slide in those without starting to sort of worry about being on thin ice somewhere down the road.
I want to ask my controller to put up the wage increase number, 3.2%. Can you put that into perspective for me? How do you think about a number like 3.2% year over year increase in wages, and how do you think about it in relation to inflation?
Well, it certainly is much better than we've had, and because inflation's been low, that's been an even better number because oil prices at the pump have not been so bad lately. So that's helped to free up some funds. Almost all those gains have been concentrated in low-wage jobs. That's also great news for these very low-wage households that are finally seeing some acceleration in wages. What's unfortunate, of course, is many of those low-wage households used to be middle-income households, and middle-income households have either slid into lower-wage slots or they aren't seeing the kind of wage gains they once did. We're not seeing it move up the food chain. Maybe that will come later this year, but that's not happened yet, and that's one of the reasons the Fed is still on the sidelines, and it's still a small shadow of its former self in terms of wage gains, say compared to the 1990s or even the early 2000s.
Diane, I have really tried to go through the questions that my viewers tweet me and ask me about the unemployment report to get down to the bottom of it with you, so I hope that we have answered a lot of those, and I appreciate your time as always. Hey, MSNBC fans, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down there and click on any of the videos here to watch the latest interviews and highlights. You can get more MSNBC for free every day with our newsletters. Just visit msnbc.com/newsletters to sign up now.